Excuse me. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to go over quickly September, October, and November, just kind of what happened, and both weather and pricing and demand. Started off here, this is September. Pretty interesting September. I think one of the main points, just to start off with, was we actually saw the peak, as of now, most likely going to be the overall peak of 2014. Saw that early in the month, 9 on the 10th of September, and it reached 64.4 gigs. That was well above most days we saw June through August. This slide right here, though, is the weather slide, and on the left-hand side you have a map of precipitation. Both the top piece is our forecast, and the bottom is the actual. And on the right, same thing, but for the temperatures. And pretty much the highlight of September was, or the best way to describe September was seasonal to warm, and it was actually contrary to our expectations. For precipitation, expectations were 25 to 50% above normal across most of the state, while actuals came in drier than normal in the north central and much wetter than normal in the south and the west. For temperatures, Dallas, we had forecasted 3 to 4 degrees cooler than average, and it actually came in 2 to 3 degrees warmer than average. Houston, same thing, 1 to 2 degrees cooler than average, but it came in 1 to 2 degrees warmer. Southern part of the state was pretty normal overall. We had forecasted that, and it came in the same way. For pricing here, this graph, you can see the orange line is the real-time pricing. This is for every day, not just only, this includes the weekends, just FYI. It's just every 7 through 22 clear, Sunday through Saturday. Orange line is the real-time on-peak average. The blue line is the dam on-peak average, and the dotted line is demand shape. And as you can see in September, we had mostly positive dart spreads throughout the month, but strongest real-time pricing was the weekend of 9/20 and 9/21. Major drivers there, as you can see, it's like we had pretty significant real-time price spikes. Generation began entering outage pretty much on Friday that weekend, entering that weekend, and we were just vastly unprepared. WA Parish 7, WA Parish 7, as well as Local Union both shut down late Friday night, while wind kind of remained only around 2 gigs. And with the strong demand, we saw Saturday demand come in actually 1,270 megawatts above forecast. It reached 51.8 gigs. Sunday, very similar day. Strong upside in prices, primarily due to the strong demand again. It actually came in, as you can see, Saturday cleared. Sorry. Saturday cleared around $56, while Sunday, the 21st, came in around 67. And big driver on Sunday, not only do we have those units still offline, those coal units, we had 3,500 megawatts, stronger demand, hours ending 14 through 19. That really drove the strong pricing. But demand, that still wasn't the peak day. The peak day came earlier in the month, where we didn't really see too significant of real-time volatility when it came on the 10th. Moving into October, very different month compared to September. It's a warmer, drier October. Our expectations were generally for precipitation 25 to 50% above normal in the far west, but it's actually quite the opposite and much drier than normal throughout most of the state, and especially in the west. Temperatures, normal temperatures were expected, but we actually came in 2 to 4 degrees above average. And Houston and Central Texas, in northern Texas, came in 2 to 4 degrees above average, and Houston and Central Texas were 2 to 4 degrees above average. We had forecasted 1 to 2 degrees warmer, so fairly. That one was a little closer, Houston and Central Texas. For October pricing, one major point when it comes to the pricing in October was a Comanche Peak Nuclear Unit 1 entered outage on 10/4. So on top of many other coal units, and every unit's trying to take their typical maintenance outages during these shoulder months, typical shoulder months, Comanche Peak also came down for a refueling outage. That was 10 on October 4th. Again, mostly positive dart spreads throughout the month. Peak demand actually came on the 1st of the month at 58.4 gigs. We still had strong cooling load coming off a pretty warm September. And then the actual, if you look shortly after that, we had the second highest demand day. We had a really, really strong dam clear, and that kind of prevented any type of real-time spikes. And that was on the 7th. Strongest real-time pricing day was 10/5. Wind came down earlier and ran weaker than expected. Stronger than anticipated demand drove 7 5-minute price spikes of $800 or around $800. And that really kind of blew out the real-time price there. And other notable days, Saturday the 18th, demand peaked 3,600 megawatts above forecast, and most of that was accounted for in the North Central, while Monday 10/20, just a few days later, demand cleared about 500 megawatts above forecast, and wind cleared 400 to 700 megawatts under forecast. I think the real highlight here is that we had, it was always pretty walking a tightrope, as we had a lot of generation and outage throughout the month of October. November, wet and frigid November, but that was as expected. We were forecasting 50 to 75% precipitation, above normal precipitation in Dallas, and it's pretty much exactly what happened. 25 to 50% above normal in Dallas and Houston, and actuals were a very, very wet south and wet, very wet in the south and close to seasonal in the Houston and Dallas area. Temperatures, we were expecting 3 to 4 degrees below normal, and it was colder than average across the state. We had 4 to 6 degrees colder across the state, so that's actually a little chillier. And actuals were all in line with forecast, as I said. Pricing-wise, we had November was a pretty interesting month. We had strong heating load later in the month, but started out, we had a lot of volatility with not really too significant of demand. Volatility is mostly driven through 20 to 23 gigs of generation on outage beginning of the month. Comanche Peak, which was originally scheduled or forecasted to come back in early November, was actually extended through the end of November. Didn't return until 11/29. Strongest days, 11/4. Wind was the main driver of some very strong real-time pricing. Wind cleared 2,000 megawatts during hour ending 18, which was 3,670 megawatts under forecast. So pretty significant drop-off in wind, and that really just drove real-time prices to slow out. Also, other notable days, 11/13, we had about 23 gigs of generation and outage on a high load day, and there just was not enough available generation to ramp on. The other notable day here, I've actually added in a price correction here. On 11/22, we had ERCOT had a sked failure, and this was a Saturday, and it prices, it was typical, just a morning ramp spike to about $700 or $750, and sked actually failed, and it stuck printing $700 for, I believe 8 straight 5-minute prints, and it blowing the price out, real-time price out to about $104, $104.91 actually to be exact. They issued price corrections about 5 days later, bringing the on-peak average back down to 45.26, which was right in line with our price forecast. Excuse me. This slide right here just shows kind of a breakout of ORDC pricing by hour. And as you can see, even though we had more volatile fall than we did this summer, we actually still really didn't see that many ORDC price spikes. 97% were $0 to or $1 or less, while We really saw no hours. Again, this is an hourly clearing price, an hourly ORDC price. So we did see some 5-minute ORDC prices that were stronger, but overall the hours never broke $50. The highest on-peak average or on-peak price adder was $47.60, and the highest off-peak was just under $1.93. And here's the largest adder day, Saturday, October 18th. We had demand came in an average of 3,300 megawatts above forecast during that time. We had a big brown coal unit appeared to have tripped off Friday afternoon. It did not return over the weekend, and much more generation entered outage than was originally forecasted. A number of combined cycle units come down, and no one was really prepared for it. Wind, not really any point on the wind. It was kind of in line with forecast, although was fairly weak. And with not as much combined cycle in coal, more steam generation was committed, but still with the strong upside in demand, surplus was extremely thin, and it drove the strong pricing through the afternoon. The biggest price adder here was hour ending 14, 15, and 16. Hour ending 14, we saw about a $13 adder. Hour ending 15 was the high of the season, 47.60. And hour ending 16 was 30.57. And in the graph here, the green line is the system lambda, and the blue line is the lambda plus the ORDC price adder. And finally, just some fall takeaway, and some review here. Strong monthly peaks, all months that were significantly higher than the previous year, fall months. Peak demand for all of 2014 occurred in the beginning of September, 63.4 gigs on September 10th. More generation was an outage than a typical seasonal average, as high as 20 to 23 gigs towards in November, and just significantly higher in September and October as well. And that also included that Comanche Peak Unit 1 fueling outage. And strong demand and the large amount of generation outage, the fall was significantly more volatile than the summer months. ORDC impact was minimal, even with the above seasonal demand and increased gen outages. Bottom line, it was not much of a shoulder season. Usually fall is pretty timid, and really was pretty interesting this year. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Leo, and he's going to talk about the weather going forward for the winter.
So we are looking at the winter weather outlook for 2014-2015. So I'm going to start with just a recap of the recent winters, prior of getting into this winter. So here we have a map with the departure from normal temperature over the past 6 winters. And we can see that the winters are really like switching from colder winter than normal to warmer winter than normal. We see that 2009, 2010 was probably the coldest winter throughout the season, but actually it was not the winter in which the coldest day happened and the highest demand happened due to heating demand. We also see that we had milder winters in 2008, 2009, 11, 12, 12, 13. And that last year was a cold winter if you compare to 2010, 2009, and this was not the coldest, but really a cold winter. So we will, there is a slide here which has a recap about what year were colder than normal, what year were warmer than normal. So we see that 09, 10, 10, 11, and 13, 14 were definitely cold years. And then we had milder winters in 08, 09, 11, 12, and 12, 13. The strongest demand in the table that we can see, strongest demand happened in 2010, 11. There was a peak demand up to 57.3. But we see that last year we were very, very close as well, only a few megawatts off from that previous winter. We also see the peak load in general. When it's a cold winter, it tends to happen more in January or February, and the mildest winters, it usually occurs in December, or at least earlier in the winter season. And it is driven mostly by heating load in general, as we can see. And it's mostly during a very extreme cold event. It doesn't have to be a cold winter throughout to necessarily reach strongest demand peak. So here we have a little bit of a recap about the temperatures. We can see the temperature that we need to get those strong spikes. So the coldest years are highlighted in blue. We see that last year, for instance, I took out the day where the temperature was the coldest, and we can see that really what matters is the low overnight temperature getting into the morning hours. That's really what drives the strongest demand peak. The daytime high is still important, but it's not as related. I mean, it will keep demand stronger during the day, but it will matter less on the peak itself. And then now we will go straight to the winter outlook for this upcoming winter. Actually, we're starting December on a very, very mild note, especially coming off from a cold November, which was very cold mid-month. So the expectation is that the winter will come. It will get colder as we progress into the winter, as we get towards January, but especially February. This is really where we expect the strongest departure, colder than normal. Whereas in December, I would say it's been trending milder and milder as we can see currently and throughout most of the month. When we compare it to the previous 5 years, we see that 2014-15 will obviously rank in the coldest camp, even though we start on a milder note in December. And also the biggest difference is that it's going to be a wet winter because we have a little bit more of a El Nino signal showing up this winter. It's not a strong El Nino, but we do see that signal showing up. So it's going to bring more rain than usual over the States. Taking all of that into account, we do expect a very strong peak this winter, which would likely come into the month of February, certainly not in December. January is a possibility, but we really think February would be the month to watch for strongest peak demand. So going through a breakdown of December, this is our expectation for the current month of December. Now we are looking already at the most recent weather guidance, and it's really trending on the milder side. It might end up colder late in the month, but also we have to keep in mind that late in the month also coincide with the holidays, and typically it tends to keep demand a little bit weaker than it would usually happen. We started December with fairly strong days, up to 44, 45 gigawatts, but now we are getting into a very mild pattern for the upcoming 6-10 days, and I would say even prior to Christmas, it should not. I'm not expecting a very cold month. So we are keeping the monthly peak down to 48 gigawatts. I would say the way it's trending right now, it's likely that there's further downside risk on that monthly peak. Could basically the peak that we just got early in the month could be the monthly peak for December. So December should not be too much of a story there. Now we're going into January, and this is where it's starting to get colder, and it would get colder than normal. Although when we compare to last year, I don't think we're going to repeat the same intensity as last year for January at least. And also, we are expecting a wet January, very rainy, cloudy. This will tend to keep overnight temperatures milder. However, cloudy days are also typically colder during the day. So we still have a good chance of seeing strong peaks above 50 gigawatts. I would say, though, that we will not repeat the strongest peak of the whole winter in January at up to 57.3 like last year. I think 54 gigawatts is a reasonable thinking over there. And getting into February, this is really where it gets much colder than normal. Also, last year was very cold, in particular in the northern half of the state. In Dallas, like the departure from normal were at least like 4 to 6 degrees below normal there over the whole month, and there were several heating load events that were really, really strong. This year, we are still expecting very cold, but further to south. So we think that it's going to be colder into Dallas, but also Houston and also along the Gulf Coast and in South Central. From year to year, the difference is that last year, February was also very dry, so that helped driving those very strong demand throughout. This year is a little bit more precipitation, although we think that February will not be as wet as the 2 previous months, as December and January. It should be closer to seasonal trend. So we think that the peak will happen in February with 57, which is very strong among all the years, but not as strong as last year by a few hundred megawatts. So now going into the wind. So overall, we are still expecting the wind to be very strong. In general, it's the second most active season, and there's a lot of variety, like during the season itself. Basically, there's wind throughout, but it doesn't switch as much from day to day. And the drivers are different from the summer. Typically, it's mostly storms that will drive the strong wind event, and with southerly flow ahead of cold fronts. And when the cold front go through Texas, then the wind shifts to the northerly side, and the sea breeze is really not as much of a factor, except in the south wind farms that are along the Gulf Coast, but really not the main thing to watch out. So our expectation for this winter is that because it is going to be a winter that is going to be on the colder side, at least perhaps not in December, but in January and February definitely, then we think that we will get stronger wind generation. There's a little bit more storm, and that makes it wet, and we expect it, to be above the last 3 winters average, but not as stormy as 2012-13, which was a milder winter actually. Last year was a cold winter, but not a lot of precipitation, not a lot of storms. This winter will be a little bit more stormy, so we will have more opportunity for wind generation.
Thank you, Leo. Now I'm going to take you through the generation outlook for these winter months. This is taken from the ERCOT Winter Seasonal Assessment of Resource Adequacy. It goes through and shows you, how many operational resources you have, your PUN capacity, your capacity from your different wind resources, and what's mothballed, what's switchable, and it basically gives you a total of 77,350 megs. ERCOT's peak demand, they're forecasting 52.8, and the reserve capacity is pretty high. You may notice one change in the on the wind. There's, instead of one wind capacity, they used to use 8.7% of wind capacity to determine how much wind to factor in their reporting. They recently made a change. ERCOT approved a change in October where they changed the methodology for calculating that peak capacity of the wind resources, and basically they moved it to 19% for non-coastal wind resources and 36% for coastal wind resources. They're based on basically the historical performance during peak periods. So that's the change for the winter. They also made a change for the summer as well. Going forward, now they're going to use 12% for non-coastal wind farms and 56% for coastal resources, coastal wind resources. So that's a little bit of a change from the 8.7%. Typical maintenance outages you have during the winter, they're about 4,100 megawatts. Typical forced outages during this time, based on the historic forced outages, from December through February weekdays, it's about 3,700 megawatts. And if you take the outages minus the total capacity, you still have nearly 70 gigs of generation available for the winter. The new wind farms coming online, they're all wind farms except for one solar unit, one small solar unit. There's about 1,226 megawatts of wind that's going to be coming on from December to February, and there's a 30 megawatt solar capacity that's supposed to be online in December. There are some changes. Frontera, which is located down the valley near Mexico, beginning in January, they're going to begin exporting 170 megawatts of the plant's 524 megawatt capacity. They're going to export it to Mexico, and then in the rest of the capacity of that unit will be exported in 2016. As soon as they finish that Cross Valley import project, as soon as they finish it, they build all the lines. They're going to start exporting the rest of that power plant capacity to Mexico. Mothball changes. You still have Monticello units 1 and 2 and Martin Lake unit 3 in seasonal mothball. They've been down since the end of September. But you do have one addition. It's the Veach Browning unit 2 with 230 megawatts. Moved from operational status to mothball status starting on January 4th. So you have it for the rest of the month. They're not running now, obviously, but going these higher load days, you will have a little bit less steam generation available for the winter months. There's no new thermal generation being added for this winter or during the winter, but year over year, there's more thermal generation available. We have the additions of Panda Temple, Panda Sherman, and the Ferguson Replacement Project, which all came online this summer, which we didn't have last year. So there will be a little bit more, despite still having a couple more, one unit exporting some power, and another one being moved to mothball status. You still have more generation in general for the winter. And now I'm going to turn over to Brian for congestion.
Thanks. Okay, so essentially I went on ERCOT's, all these outages here are from ERCOT's Consolidated Transmission Outage Report published yesterday at hour 12. I went through, identified all the line and transformer outages that are, that are published through February. I think there's about 60% of ERCOT's outages are scheduled within 6 days, so this definitely isn't a complete picture. A lot of things change. And essentially after I've identified all the important ones, I broke them down between North, Houston, South, and West. So first here we have North Zone. A lot of these outages, they're ongoing. All the ones that I guess I highlighted in blue are the ones that I probably care more about, that either drive day-ahead or real-time congestion. I think with, as we move into January, load comes up a little bit, but we have greater return of base load generation, net demand. So essentially having a better committed supply stack should decrease the reliance of the units that get the upside, such as Mountain Creek and Lake Hubbard, which drive bullish load zone, essentially the price separation of load zone over hub. So I pretty much expect, wider day-ahead spreads than real-time to continue. With the greatest potential of real-time price spreads on the strongest load days, pretty much only at the peak hour. But kind of going back, looking at some of the, diving in a little deeper, some of the nodal, nodal impacts over the past month. The ones I look at specifically were Mountain Creek and, Mountain Creek over Hanley. Mountain Creek's not going to commit. They're very unlikely, if ever, to commit in the day ahead this coming January, I'd expect, which, because the lack of gen there in the day ahead, it's essentially bullish that unit. Mountain Creek, being factored into the north load zone price is more likely to lift the load zone over the hub with little risk a day of real-time congestion. And I'd say on the highest load days with, during the peak hour, the outages in white, may help to drive bullish north congestion, but, on average, some of these are out right now, and they have very little impact, but I guess the ones on my radar that are highlighted in blue are central to pretty much buried right in the rat's nest of DFW. So the takeaway really here is the basis spreads are likely to continue in the day ahead. I expect wider day ahead over real time pretty much probably through February. So next, Houston. In blue are the load zone over hub risks. Green are essentially bullish Houston hub and load zone. It's probably, the separation is probably Houston over north. You can see these Apache to cogen, UCC cogen outages we have scheduled, and that's extremely bullish Houston load zone. We're not even seeing that in the day ahead right now, so it's hard to really say that even these load zone hub, the outages that separate load zone and hub. I mean, we're not even seeing separation right now, so I guess take that as you will. But the interesting thing is that as we move, into January and February, we shift from, if you can argue, load zone over hub separation to bullish, essentially bullish Houston over north, due to all these lines of mainly 345 kVs that are out, that generally move power from north to Houston. If you think of the stack we have more base load. We have we have a higher ratio of gen to load in the north than we do in Houston. Houston gen's more expensive than the north, so pretty much we're going to see north to Houston flows. With these outages, the potential to see Houston over north in the day ahead, which we haven't been seeing pretty much over the past month. It's been north over Houston. I do expect that to kind of get back to normal, if you will, with Houston being over north in the day ahead, and the greatest potential to see Houston over north in the real time, is again on the high load days with the strongest wind. So really the takeaway is here is we'll see a shift to Houston over north again, but with relatively weak load, wider day ahead than real time. So now I got my south. I essentially, with the south being so large and all the different zones, I've broken it out into Corpus Christi risks, Valley risks, LCRA, and CPS risks. A lot of these lines are currently out. We were seeing like AEN, LCRA, CPS over South Hub. I really don't see any reason that we're going to see South Hub over any of CPS, LCRA, AEN. These outages, I guess I'll just start with my bullish LCRA, Lego Vista to Marshall 4. That's currently out. We see a little bit of LCRA over hub separation in the day ahead. I generally don't think we're going to see too much real-time congestion. But again, the riskiest hours would be the peak hour. The strongest load specifically for Austin I think our average peak is hour and 19. So I'd say the greatest real-time risk of seeing negative DART spreads for AEN is hour and 19, pretty much specifically. And I've highlighted every outage that I kind of care about that I think would drive that separation. Next is these valley outages. I think the greatest risk to see south load zone clear over AEN, CPS, LCRA is the lack of wind in the valley. The Penascal wind farms, Redfish, pretty much all the wind farms in the valley, driven by these valley line outages and generation strength in the valley. Frontera, I know, is going to be a switchable unit. So if I think a decreased potential for bullish south load zone would result if Frontera is actually sending power into Mexico instead of eastward along, let's see here, these La Palma and MV Ranger to Westmer, Net into Rio Hondo, Aztec to Southeast Edinburgh. They're all east to west flowing line. They're all west to east flowing lines in the valley during periods of weak wind, or east to west flowing lines during periods of strong wind and generation weakness in the valley. I know we'll have all our units back online in the valley. When I say all units, I mean really Hidalgo, Frontera, Magic Valley. So generation strength on that side combined with these outages drives potential for wide load zone over hub spreads during periods of low wind. Looking back at the wind slide that Leo presented on, our weakest wind is actually in December. These line outages don't really start, and it is December on peak. These outages don't really start until January, where we actually have stronger wind in the overnight. So I think we should see relatively real tight load zone over hub spreads. And continuing down, similar CPS. There's a couple outages here. There's fewer outages that I see on the schedule for CPS. At the end of the day, I think every one of them is bullish CPS, only really in the day ahead. So I guess the takeaway here is AEN, CPS, LCRA over South Hub in the day ahead in real time. AEN and LCRA over South Load Zone in the day ahead due to mainly these Corpus Christi. Every outage I have highlighted here in yellow is more or less bearish Corpus Christi and a lot of the units that are in there, which bearish Corpus Christi is also bearish South Load Zone. So that's why, with AEN getting a little bit upside, Corpus Christi getting a little downside, I expect AEN, LCRA over South and day ahead. And the greatest potential to have that revert would be weak wind days during the valley outages. So pretty much South Load Zone over Hub basis will be wider the day ahead versus real time, except for during periods of weak wind. And finally, west. Again, blue is load zone over hub separation. And there's really no risks that are. I mean, even if these outages are bullish to both the hub and load zone, the load zone, gets exponentially lifted relative to the hub. So even bullish hub risks, the load zone blows up more or less. So what do I think for the winter? Given the fact December on peak has the lowest wind, I would expect the combination of the low wind, these outages to have the greatest bullish west load zone potential during the December on peak. And we're only 5 days into it. Yesterday we had no wind and we didn't even see any separation. So take that, I guess, as you will. With my greatest potential for the separation being December on peak. So if we don't see it in December, does that mean we won't see it in January, February? I guess I wouldn't go that far, but I would go as far to say the weakest potential for any separation is the January off peak, given that's the strongest wind. We could even see it go the other way with the hub over the load zone, like I think we saw on Tuesday morning. We saw some congestion that was pretty much put the hub $2 over the load zone. So I think that the greatest potential for that is again January off peak. A lot of these outages are central to San Angelo, where we've been seeing some congestion around the Cedar Hill, the San Angelo power area. That does drive load zone over hub. All these outages, they look like they're pretty much, in effect. One through 1:30, and with the fact that ERCOT schedules outages, within 6 days, there's a chance a lot of these things will continue. Essentially, probably. I guess I'm not going to be real. I'm not going to expect wide real-time spreads until we start seeing them. So, I guess it's pretty much what I have here.
All right, so I'm going to wrap this all up with a quick summary. ORDC impact was minimal this fall, even with the above seasonal demand and increased generation outages. Peak demand for this fall and in 2014 was actually in September at 63.4 on September 10th. Fall was significantly more volatile in the summer months. Going forward to the wind, January is going to be the windiest month of the winter on average, with December and February not far behind. December is going to be the weakest wind month of this winter. We do have increased storm activity, and that should favor an above normal winter wind season. Outages, the lines that are currently scheduled to be out, we're seeing a bullish north hub over load zone in the day ahead. There will be some risk in the real time on the days that have the highest load, probably in February. We also are seeing in the south, the NOE load zones, AEN, LCRA, and CPS over the south hub, both day ahead in real time. And we're probably also going to see, with the north to Houston lines being out, we'll probably start to see some Houston over north congestion start to come back in January. Bullish west load zone risk is greatest in December on peak. That's when the lowest wind is. We've only seen a little bit, but load's been very low there. Peak loads for December, January, and February. For December, it's going to be 48 gigs or lower. and then January it's going to be, we're predicting 54 and about 57 gigawatts in February. It looks like we have enough generation for December and January. February's cold weather and high load should bring a few days with the potential for some strong pricing, depending on other factors, gas prices, freezing, forced outages, etc. But despite adding 1 or 2 more units in the mothball and Frontera sending some power in Mexico, there is more thermal generation available this winter with the Panda Sherman, Panda Temple, and the Ferguson replacement project now commercially available. And that concludes our winter outlook. If you have any questions, you can feel free to type them in, and we will do our best to answer them. Thanks. All right, so we got one question. What is the impact of more precipitation to peak load? I'm going to hand this over to Leo to answer this one.
So typically in the winter, when we want to have strongest peak load, we need cold temperatures, and it's easier to get cold temperatures during clear skies overnight. So I would say that if there are a lot of precipitation, you might get strong demand during the day, but peak hour will not be the strongest.
All right, we got one last question. It's a little more general. It's just, what are our thoughts of winter over the U.S. in general? Is it similar to what we're predicting in ERCOT, or is it colder? I'll let Leo just answer this kind of quickly or generally.
So when we were preparing the winter outlook for the whole of the U.S., we were expecting that December would be the more tricky month, and it's turning out to be the mildest month. So December will not resemble January and February. We're expecting for east of the Rockies, we're expecting gradual getting colder as we progress in the winter. February should be cold in PJM, eastern half of MISO, pretty much the southeast, Texas as well. Whereas further in the west of the U.S., it should be a milder winter in general. So we're expecting warm west, mixed central, and colder in the east and southeast.
Great. Is there any other questions? All right. Well, we want to thank you for attending the ERCOT Winter Outlook. And if you do have any questions, these slides will be made available. We will email them out to everybody who attended. And I think we also will make the recording available as well if you want to go back and look at anything. So thanks again for attending the ERCOT Winter Outlook, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.